Morning, everybody. I'll just wait for Studio. Ready? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning up this morning. We'll get on our way and we can start with a Karakia.
Kia ora. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kinekina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, e tio, e huka, e hauhu, tihei, Māori ora.
Thank you, Greg. If the confirm that meeting could continue more than 2 hours. Oh, sorry. Oh, apologies for Pamela and Warren and Kippa for lateness. A mover. All those in favour? Done. Yeah. Confirmation of the agenda. A mover and a seconder. Stu. Hyde. All those in favour? Aye. Any disclosures of interest? So just move on. Yeah. Yep. So we'll just confirm the previous meeting minutes. A mover, Bruce. Noel. All those in favour? Aye.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our first order of the day is a brief update on the resilient development and emergency management activities. So I'll ask Dave to come up just to quickly present this particular paper. Okay. Yep, no problem. So if that's all right with you, I guess through Mr. Chairman to change the order of the agenda. And so that's means we'll jump straight to the biosecurity and biodiversity operations update, if that's right with you, Mr. Chairman. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge, so we have a few staff in the room and online today. So we've got Patrick Whaley, who's going to join us now for our biosecurity and biodiversity. He's our manager of biodiversity and biosecurity. We have David Wade in the room, our manager of business and technical services. Adam Munro, manager flood protection and land drainage, and Grant Blakey, manager at Waikato and West Coast catchments. We also have Emily O'Donnell online from Whitianga, manager Hauraki Coromandel catchments. We have Sarah Leland, our Lower Waikato zone manager. We have Jodie Kochian, our Hauraki zone manager. We have Chloe, who is our Coromandel zone manager. Sorry, I'm just looking at the list up on the screen. And we have Inga, who's also joined us from a media point of view to listen to the discussion today and pick up on anything that we wish to share as a committee. I think I've covered off everyone there. All right, without further ado, I'll hand over to Patrick. And just note this is a particularly important item. This is the annual report on the progress that we've made against the Regional Pest Management Plan and the first report for the current RPMP. Thanks, Patrick.
Morena, councillors. I trust you're all well this morning. It is, as Greg said, the first report of our new strategy in RPMP, which is pretty, it's a big step. Before I get into that though, we have an end of year report where the annual report is appended to. So I guess through the chair, if it's okay, I'd like to take that as read and come back through questions once I've just noted a few key points out of the RPMP report.
Continue, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so council approved the new the Regional Pest Management Plan and Biosecurity Strategy in August 2022. As part of this process, a new formatted operational report operational plan was developed. And we hope that that would make reporting a lot easier, and a lot of work into the report. So hopefully that works. It's a very different format than the previous annual reports. A lot of those were just all words. So we've tried to move away from that, a lot more maps in there, and better summaries of the data that we collect. So I'd like, if you've got any comments on the format, if it works for you, really interested, because we talked about the previous one last year that it's a bit clunky and hard to digest. So hopefully it works. So if you've got any comments, I'm all ears. So what I'd like to do is explain the information in the report quickly, outline some of the key achievements, and then pop to questions. So the annual report is in 3 sections. The first summarises our biosecurity programs that are covered by the Regional Pest Management Plan. Specifically, that's where we have rules or we have programs that we lead. The second part covers the biosecurity strategy. So that's where we don't have our own rules, but we're part of wider programs, say the Kauri program, Marine program. We're a support agency to other players. And the third part is a lot more detail on the individual species programs that we run and whether they're on track, off track, or whether there are issues. I'm not going to talk through all of that, but I'll just pull some of the key points out of it. So on page, I believe page 4 of the report, is a bit of a summary, and we've tried to just pull some of the key statistics out. The biosecurity program continues to be really high profile, over 73,000 hits on the website, over 900 incidents and requests logged for service. So it's a really busy and high profile part of the business. And in terms of a financial summary, we still generate considerable external funding, and you can see that in the report. But actually a large amount of the leverage that we have doesn't land up in our bank accounts. Say for the Wallaby program, there's millions of dollars spent, but Bay of Plenty Regional Council is the banker for the 2 regions. So we don't see the funding, but the activities largely sit in the Waikato region at this point.
Just for the committee's reference, this is page 28 of your agenda, and some key facts there.
And it's taken 3 years, but we've finally got through a lot of the COVID-related delays. This is so 22, 23. We finally got through a lot of the delays that have built up. You'll see it in the report. Like most of ICM's business, we suffered this year from the rather horrendous weather that has beaten up the program somewhat. So if you can go next slide. Thank you. So some of you will remember when we did our regional pest management plan review, we fell back on, this is a pest invasion curve, and all other regions have used it to sort of help differentiate where our different programs sit. So you'll see that we have 5 programs that sit in our regional pest management plan, and they're detailed under the management options on the slide. We've got exclusion programs, eradication, sustained control, containment, sustained control, and site lead programs. And what I've tried to do on the slide, and I hope it works, is show you, one, that those exclusion eradication programs are really important because we're trying to stop a pest becoming really widespread and have massive impacts across the whole region. And 2, whose responsibility it is for these things. So New to New Zealand work, that's MPI's gig where we support. So you've got in the little yellow bar, we've got MPI leading and us supporting through, and as you progress through it, we become more dominant as it becomes more of a regional issue. And once things are really widely established, we take again a bit of a support role through our biodiversity team to help individual landowners deal with widespread issues. Any questions on that? I'll step it through with some of the key programs later on. I'll come back to this. So one thing our new format's allowed to do is basically do your exception reporting. So if you go to the next slide. Thanks. So I've pulled out all of the programs that are either at risk or we have some significant issues we need to grapple with out of the detail at the back of the report. So what I'll quickly do is step you through some of the reasons why some of these programs are either at risk or majorly at risk. So the exclusion pests are, a few years ago, we didn't think we had these pests in the region. We have a couple of sites for both freshwater eelgrass and horsetail. It was a bit hard managing those sites this year again with the weather, but we're pretty confident that we'll be able to pick them up pretty quickly this financial year and get on top of them. For the variegated thistle, again, the wet year meant that we couldn't get to the site last year, but we will get on top of it this year. So it's at risk, but there's a plan in place. So I'm really confident that those 3 programs are well on track, and by next year they'll be green. Not so much for the alligator weed and yellow flag iris, which are progressive containment species. We run those 2 programs in conjunction. And while we got through a lot of the work this year, the flooding has created chaos, to be honest. It's moved alligator weed all over the show. We've got a case study in the report on page 37, which again, Greg can help me out with the actual page of the agenda, which shows just huge grass of alligator weed being moved all over the Waikato. So it's taking us quite a bit of time to get our head around where these pests have been moved around to. We're currently reviewing the program, and we've already flagged through the long-term plan that we have operational issues that we need to address with some more resourcing. So I guess this is a work in progress on this discussion for alligator weed and yellow flag iris. Plumbing spindleberry is the same. So again, because of the weather, we didn't get around all the sites. We are in the middle of reviewing this program, and again, we're pretty confident that we'll be able to get that back on track this year with it's already better weather than it was this time last year. Golden Dodder, I think Stu, you'll remember that we put this in the plan in support of the Department of Conservation, who's leading this work. Again, it's a bit of a weather dependent place. It's in the lower Waikato and right on the edge of some wetlands, but we're pretty confident that we've already got the program back on track with the Department of Conservation. Mexican water lily. Some of the discussions that we had when we did the regional pest management plan review was around getting some better surveillance and a better data management system. This is a species that we know of a site, some sites it's contained, but we're not 100% confident that they're the only sites in the Waikato. So we're again reviewing the surveillance plan for that. And I think I'll skip to giant gunnera. So this is a species where through the regional pest management plan review, we wanted to take a stronger role in the management of it. And we are partly the way through a better approach to surveillance, which by the end of this financial year, we'll have a really good idea of exactly where the containment boundary will be for some increased control. So not on track yet, but confident that by the end of this financial year, it'll go from red to orange. So that's exception reporting. We're not going to talk about all the stuff that's on track and going well. Some of the key case studies and that you'll be able to read through in the annual report, I'd just like to highlight because there's so much work associated going with. Probably the biggest one is the Plantel system that we've been developing with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. It's fair to say that some of that data that we've been sitting on, we haven't been able to access because the system we've been used is so out of date. And now this is the first year that we've had it running. Reporting's been a lot easier. We've now been able to spit out maps around distribution of species. And it was really easy to develop with the Bay. It was fantastic. It didn't cost a lot of money. That's going to really revolutionize how we run the plant pest program. So it's a big win. You've probably seen the coyote program's profile's been pretty high this last financial year. We've achieved a lot of stuff. And that's all based on significant MPI funding. It's really cool. And again, we'll have an ongoing conversation through the long-term plan about how much or how little we want to try and maintain that level of support to the community. I don't know how much more we want to talk through the stuff. I mean, it's really about, your guys' questions. And did you like the annual report, and did you find it easier to follow how the program's going?
Thank you. Bruce has got a question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. I'm really pleased to see you've highlighted the giant gunnera. And I just wanted to know, are you working with the City Council on this issue? Because the city actually has quite a number of infestations of giant gunnera, and largely they along that river corridor. But of course, the source for some of this is the Hamilton Gardens. And so the point I'm making here is that, these are all escapes from somebody's been cultivating them, and now we live with the consequence. So I'm interested in knowing what contribution the City Council is making to this, addressing this issue, and are we also focusing on getting rid of these sorts of plants where they're being actively cultivated still in places like Hamilton Gardens?
Yeah, we will be. So yeah, that's part of this year's work, is to pull that together into a bit more of a comprehensive operational plan so that we can bring partners like Hamilton City Council or others into it. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Bruce. And Bruce made a very good observation there, because actually, if you drive around where most people put their lawn clippings and things like that, they're in little gullies that are close to waterways, and there's bulbs and all sorts of things laying in there with it. So it easily gets into our waterway, and then it's transferred completely within a catchment in no time at all. Yeah, so Stu, you've got a question? Thank you.
Oh, yes. Look, firstly, Patrick, I really like this report. I don't know how many of these I've read now over the years, and this was the first one I've read. It only took me about, I don't know, half an hour, and you got a really good snapshot really quickly of, by the time you'd finished it, you still felt fresh and you had a really good handle on what the issues were. I'm assuming, so I'm just looking at Velvet Leaf at the moment, but as we go forward, we'll have both the maps and all the bars showing the progress on the various pests as well, because that's one of when of course you see the map of where the infestations are in the region, you immediately think, oh, I wonder what it was like last year or 5 years ago, that sort of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. And we're really pleased, because it was pretty painful when you're trying to trawl through people's brains, download GPS systems, and use antiquated databases. That's really nice to have it all in one place. And so, yeah, absolutely. And be more open if things are succeeding or not, and make sure we can navigate if things are off track.
yeah, exactly. So Velvet Leaf as an example, I was a bit surprised to see how there's nearly 2,000 hectares here. Are we winning on that one?
Yeah, in the Waikato, we're pretty confident that all the landowners they're really good to work with.
Yeah.
They get the impacts, and the wider industry, right? The grain guys, contractors. It's a really cool project.
Yeah.
Everyone's really bought into it.
Yeah.
So we're pretty confident. I mean, a little bit nervous about Auckland because it's pretty widespread up there, and there's no boundary for these things. The regional boundary means nothing. So yeah, so it's about maintaining that comprehensive kind of team approach to the project if it's going to maintain the success.
Yeah. And I noticed like the odd one that didn't have the map, it just had a photo. I assume that's just teething problems with getting information.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no,
There's still it's still a bit of a work in progress.
Yeah.
With this, but hopefully we'll just improve it.
Yeah, no, solid. I really like it. And I suppose the only other question, Robbie, or Mr. Chair, just noting Patrick's comments with some of these more challenging ones, such as alligator weed. This committee's got I think, a bit of a responsibility to share any concerns we've got with the wider council going through this LTP process. It's all well and good to say let's have zero rates, but we're responsible for leading this part of the governing, demonstrating leadership from a governance perspective on this side of the business and helping Patrick and his team do this. So we need to be quite vocal with advocating for what we think is the right thing through this LTP process. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that regard, I'd pick up on the eradication curve that Patrick put up before, and that it does show the very critical connection between both the biosecurity and the biodiversity program in terms of progression of approach. And that's why you'll see in the LTP conversation that both activities are a joined up approach.
Yeah, and I think with alligator weed, I mean, when we spoke in the workshop in February, my team had just been up to Northland, and Northland have pretty much let alligator weed go, and they were pretty gobsmacked with the impacts, the breadth of the impacts across all of the primary industries up there. Kumara goes right through to the sheep and beef. We don't want it like that in the Waikato.
It's true, and your deputy chair has made it very clear the issues of alligator weed. I get told about it regularly.
It's not just alligator weed. There's a whole bunch of things. I mean, and a good chunk of these, the average person on the street's never heard of.
No.
And even there's a lot of stuff in here that I really don't know much about. But
I was shocked with the numbers of things that we've got that are coming up to be a problem. Yeah,
So we've got to be quite strong with our voice in this LTP process.
Yeah, definitely. Michael, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, awesome report. For me, being new, it was really clear on everything that's happening in our region. The big part for me being new, though, is just, the collaboration with the MPI or DOC and stuff like that, and how far do we go on our responsibility and where does that stop or start, because that comes down to cost. How much advocacy is there put into, like for finding funding or saying that's our job finishes here and MPI starts there. I know it's a hard one, but it's just trying to get my head around it.
It's a really good question. Can you flick back to the pest invasion curve? Yep, sure. So MPI has kind of two roles, and the first role is very clear. Everyone gets it, which is the border. New to New Zealand. That's where they've put majority of their effort. Their second role is in long-term management of programs where they can provide, national leadership. And there's some programs that are really effective at doing that. So the Wilding Pine project is one where they provide really effective leadership, supported by regions, communities, and Department of Conservation. But MPI is absolutely the lead on it. But they don't put all the money in. Everyone's trying to do their part. Same with Kāori, it's pretty similar. So that's, and each program is quite subtly different with different stakeholders. So it's a little bit complex, but we're trying to find that middle ground where you don't get the full responsibility, where you need national leadership on things.
Yeah, I suppose that's where I'm coming from, Patrick, because obviously it's pooling resources, you know, if you're having to come up with extra money in those, whether it's wallaby or carrel or the golden clam, and then that might be taken off. Like I notice, you know, for me, the river management is quite light on funding, you know, or whether we do enough in that area for, you know, our wetlands that are getting, you know, decimated through the ramping or the erosion that's happening around, especially the upper part of the Waikato region. And then also, you know, Old Man's Bed, you know, how much do we have to take off those normal day-to-day routines with all these new species and biodiversity that's coming in?
Yeah, that's right. And so I think you know, my advice is that advocacy is really important, and in support of our programs in the region, both from a staff perspective. You know, I'm always on the phone or in meetings with MPI pushing our barrow, I guess, and the same would be from a political side would be important.
Are you touching on summarising animal species, or is this just the plant stuff?
No,
What I want to get at, I don't want to miss some opportunities to have asked some questions if this is the end of your presentation.
It was purely picking out the stuff that is got issues that we're grappling with. That was all I was going to point out. I'm taking
Right.
the rest as read.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll keep going then. Look, I've got a few questions really. Well, we'll start with the page 3 on the plan drops of the biosecurity and the you know, which one is it? The integrated biosecurity, biodiversity operations, pending operations coming up. And page 2 is that's the budget there. Is it 20 million? Is that of the? It's not the agenda. It's the extra additional information we were supplied with. Well, this is a 7-page document that we were provided. Yep, it was
It
sent to us.
provided earlier, so that's the confusion. Is it one of those components you sent out earlier?
Hmm.
It's been reintegrated.
Sure,
I haven't got
I'm
the
looking
agenda
at this.
open.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here. So anyway, page 2 of this. It's okay. Well, let's look at that. See if it's the same. Yep, thanks. Okay, so these pending aerial operations on page 20, page 3 of the agenda. What? Yeah, is it 20 of the agenda? Thanks. These so Haungaroa Bush block, right? Is WRC funding that in conjunction with DOC and TB3? Is that correct?
No, it's not TB free. That's
Sorry, what's TBC?
to be confirmed.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so DOC and WRC, Haungaroa Bush, are we funding part of that operation?
Yes.
Is it private land that a private land part of the operation that we're funding, or is it DOC land?
So we only fund private land.
Yeah, so it's the private land part of that operation. Thank you. Could you get back to us with the 3 aerial operations pending, just on the number of hectares, Patrick, please? Number of hectares of those operations.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay, so page 19, sort of annual report, page 19. quite a few pages to go through here. Yeah, I'm working off the other information we got first, you see, so. Okay. Were there, in the last, 12 months, were there any non-targeted animal incidents? Farm animals reportedly poisoned,
As in stock.
as in anything non-target?
I can't recall at this point. I don't know.
Sorry, you can't.
I don't know. I haven't been in my
Could you-
role.
oh, yeah,
Clyde, I
okay.
haven't been in my role, so
Okay,
I-
could you report back to us with those, because the previous council,
So what, if it's not in the
determine-
report,
yep,
there's nothing to report. So my understanding, Greg, is that we're only putting stuff in here that happened, right? There was an issue, breached a rule, something like that. So it was supposed to be in the report. And if there's nothing in here,
Yeah, so during the previous training, there was a discussion about having an idea of how we're going in terms of compliance against the various requirements that come with these operations. And so within these reports, we report any non-compliance that we identify through our operations.
because the last training, there was a incident where one of the contractors didn't report to the EPA and they were fined. Is that correct? Wasn't actually
I don't think they were fined,
notified or warned or?
or they were asked to report.
So
So
through you, Mr.
because-
Chair,
Yep.
I'm happy to have a conversation offline to try and answer those questions for you, councillor.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I was down to the common brush-tailed possum on page 42 of my, I'm not sure what page in the agenda because I'm working on the report. Look, I see that the common brush-tailed possum's the only thing you're sort of monitoring.
66 is your agenda, members, sorry.
Thanks.
Page 66.
So, we're talking about WRC involved in caring about the environment and, managing biosecurity, biodiversity, etc. But I noticed that there aren't, it doesn't appear that you're monitoring rats, stoats, ferrets, cats. It just seems to be the brush-tailed possum. Now, if it's in regard to managing TB, well, that should be TB-free's priority, not ours. And I just wondered, do you monitor the actual problem species when it comes to biodiversity?
So this program's set up to manage possums, and it's been a long-running program for the council. The monitoring we do is to one, give the contractors an idea of the possum density in a particular block, and the second is a performance based for the contract. And that's the basis of the program.
Okay, thanks. And okay, just another thing here. It just says number of inquiries / complaints received through IRIS equals 46. What does that mean? Complaints, inquiries, why would they be pulled together? That's page. Thanks.
Page 69.
Thanks.
Really unhelpful.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, so we're talking about the common brush-tailed possum.
Yep.
So that's page 66 of your agenda, and you'll see under program summary, there is a statistic there around number of inquiries, complaints received in the table.
So what's the question?
The question was, Greg, did you just say that itemized the actual, I just want to know how many complaints as opposed to inquiries, because it says, if I'm reading this right in the report I've got, it's number of inquiries / complaints received, and then it says 46. So are they complaints or are they inquiries, or what number of each?
So I mean, this is what they're classed as an iris, right? They're either, and it's a massive spectrum of people that ring up and want to borrow a Tim's trap because they've got a possum that's eating their lemons, through to they're upset that the Department of Conservation isn't doing pest management in associated reserve or something. So it covers the full spectrum of inquiries or complaints that this council receives, and sometimes it's loosely associated with possums or not. So you
Yes,
put it under
yeah.
box. So
But I think my point is, when it's pooled like that, you could have one inquiry and 45 complaints, and it doesn't give a true representation of the actual issues that we're being presented with. I just think that could be looked at just so it's either an inquiry or a complaint. Possible?
yeah, I get what you're talking about, but I think, if you could imagine the spectrum of things, it would be very hard to summarize, someone that's having their roses eaten, which is,
There's a difference though, yeah.
Governance role here, not into the detailed operational role. And I'm not trying to be,
It should, to be fair, is it a complaint? There's a lot of complaints. 30% of the aerial operations have oversprays incidents based on EPA annual reports. So, it's just worth noting, I think, whether it's a complaint or whether it's an inquiry.
I think that's, I think you're mixing up two different things there, and that, if there is a breach from an overfly from a MOH permission or something like that, that would come through this report as a separate part of the business. This is purely about people ringing up and asking for advice or support or help. I think you're mixing two
Okay,
different things.
thanks. Thank you. Just one other thing, Patrick, the wallabies, 11,000 hectares is noted as being a management control for wallabies. That's not in the Waikato region though, is that right, or is it?
Yeah, will be.
Is it? So that they're beyond the Rotorua district, or is that part of our territory there where the management's happening down there?
We've got some of the Rotorua district in our region.
Yeah,
they're
I understand that, but
No, the distribution is well within the Waikato.
okay. Where is that? What area?
They're almost to Tokoroa. They're down past Rainbow Mountain, Waikiki Valley, Mamaku Plateau.
Okay, thanks. Yep, thank you.
Question, Bruce?
It's also important that we don't, you can be a bit over precise about which area we're talking about, because the point about biosecurity is we're also trying to prevent wallabies from invading the region.
Yeah. Ben, you got a question?
Yeah, two questions. One is, with the biosecurity, it's a targeted rate across all ratepayers, is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Because of the targeting, does it mean it falls more on rural areas than on urban, or does it work out approximately the same?
Sorry, I didn't cut.
Well, if you've got more land, you end up paying more on a targeted rate.
No.
UAGC. Okay, that's fine. So page 29 is the financial summary. The actual expenditure was nearly $800,000 more than the original budget. Was that made up by an underspend in the previous year?
Yeah, it'll be carryovers from big contracts.
Right. So it didn't end up with a budget overflow. It was just, yeah.
No, it doesn't take many of the possum contracts to go over a year to knock over $1 or $2 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. Just with the possums, is the copper peak dome not actually, do we not do any assessment of none there at all anymore?
No, that was a TB-free program, and I believe they've completed works there.
Just, I've been inundated in possums in the last 12 months and they are really bad. So seriously, I don't know I know I've rung Doc in the past to come and do some trapping, but in the last month, I've mostly killed 5 that are in my cow shed alone, trying to eat the meal out of my hoppers that my cows are eating from. So yeah, and and the other one, sorry, is wild cats is actually becoming an issue on the Karakia Peak Dome as well. So they're people just love going to the beach, opening the door, and letting their cats go when they're going for a holiday, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue all the time. So and they're eating native birds and all the other stuff that's out there too. So yeah, it's becoming I know Karakia Peak Dome wasn't on any of those measurements, but I think we need to start assessing it a little bit more and looking what's out there and what are the pests that are. I'm just putting it out there. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Patrick.
I've just been looking at my rates. So the biosecurity is based on capital value. But is that on lots of 2 hectares or more? Because my experience when I did live in the city, there were plenty of possums around and other issues. So can someone tell me whether it's on 2 hectares or more, or is it across all rating units? I'll be pushing in the LTP to go across all rating units if it's not.
I think it's across everybody.
Including the city and towns and.
That's through you, Mr. Chair. We'll get some clarity on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Point 2 insofar as the gardens, things escaping. So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a very good report, and only thing I'd say, Patrick, if we could include some of the maps together so we could actually assess that little bit. I think having each individual was a little bit difficult, but other than that, it was it was a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now move to our Resilient Development Emergency Management paper. So I welcome Dave Wade and Rick Lefting, our team leader, Regional Resilience, to the table. Just while Dave and Rick are making themselves at home, I did mention earlier we've got Chloe Wilson, our Coromandel Zone Manager online. We also have Kate Lewis, who is our team leader for Hauraki Coromandel Catchments. Kate has recently joined us from TCDC, and so this will be her first meeting.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Morning, councillors. Before I hand over to Rick, I just want to request that the report that you've received, which is the year-end report, is taken as read. We can talk and take questions as through some of the financials, if you wish. What I've really wanted to talk about today was, I guess, some of the main moving forward type work. I guess you'll see from the financials we've underspent significantly in the regional resilience program space. Good reasons for that, and I'll let Rick cover that. Yeah, and in terms of the program, we really want to, I guess, emphasize the need for that program to continue. I'll hand over to Rick just now. Rick, you want to?
Thank you, Dave, and kia ora, councillors. So yeah, apologies for my lateness. I was seconded by the CN chair to have a quick chat with the panel members of the inquiry for the North Island severe weather events this morning as well. So just for that. So, yeah, look, we have had a very interesting year, as I'm sure you all are very well aware, that has had an impact on the work that the Regional Resilience Team undertake. I would like to point out that the expenditure versus budget graph that we have is a little bit misleading. You can see obviously the significant overspend for emergency management to respond to the flood events. But what isn't immediately clear is that for resilient development, while it looks like it's gone well, a lot of those costs that have come through that have increased our spend there have been through management allocations, and in actuality we've actually had quite a big underspend because we haven't been able to have the capacity to run with the regional resilience program work over the last year. So much of those funds are to be rolled over or carried over for this financial year and continue that work. So in terms of the work that we do around regional resilience and what we are looking at for the future is to assist our communities around adaptation. So we have had some really good successes and some really good learnings from the work with Wharakawa Coast and also TCDC shoreline management pathway work as well. Now, both of those projects have required significant council resources, both in terms of internal staff time, but also for undertaking assessments and community engagement as well. So we have those two projects are continuing in terms of the implementation phase, and we are also kicking off some further adaptation planning work with our Hauraki District Council colleagues for the Hauraki Plains, and also Waikato District Council as well, with the lower Waikato and coastal communities. So those two projects are kicking off, and we are planning ahead for those. The Regional Resilience Program also is there to support our climate change risk assessment work and implementation of Council's strategic priorities, mainly being the sustainable development and infrastructure priority, and also the climate change roadmap as well. So we have our fingers in lots of pies, but they will have a resilience lens and focus to that as well. And with what we've seen recently with our weather events, that's coming more to the fore. And again, with these inquiries, we need to ensure that we are undertaking and maintaining and enhancing our understanding of our natural environment and what risks they may pose to our communities, and to adapt and maintain resilience of those communities.
Just Mr. Chairman, item number 14, I didn't quite understand that, the 330,000 that got reallocated, what in management costs, so was that the emergency, the overspend in that, was it, or?
Yes, so again, this is background financial accounting, where we have management allocation costs. And so while we were underspent in resilient development, the labour charges that come through when we had other people working in that space bumps up those costs. So it's an internal accounting or financial process where those management costs get attributed to that budget.
If I could speak further, just for the committee's assurance, it basically means that labour has gone to a different part of the organisation than what was planned, but overall it's still the same as an organisation. So basically we had a lot of people working in that EM space, unsurprisingly. And so net positive, and say for example, you have someone in the science policy and information team would be doing some work in this space. They'll charge their time to RICS cost centre for the response. As a result, they don't charge their hours to a cost centre that they were planning to. And that breakdown of across the groups is provided in the paper for you.
So just following up on that, in terms of the overspend, how is that managed out through the system?
So it washes through our accounts. So say, for example, some cost centres might have less labour charged to them than was initially planned. Some will have more, and that's what you're seeing how is this particular cost centre has more labour, and it brings in more allocations that come with that labour as well.
So does that mean we end up with a shortfall in terms of funding? It simply means
it all balances out. From a labour point of view, it balances out.
And through the chair, most of those, the majority of those overspend is labour costs.
So, talking about finances, my concern is that weather events are becoming more significant, and having been in local government for 16 odd years now, over time, they've become more costly to deal with on a TA basis and obviously regionally as well. So my question to you, and will be to a number of other portfolio holders through the LTP process, is that are the budgets being set going forward to deal with what people talk significant weather events, which are becoming more the norm as opposed to one-off occasionally in distant memory? So is the frequency of these events being taken into account in our budgeting?
So a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is to understand our systems and understand how they are changing for the future to ensure that we maintain that resilience for our community. So understanding the sensitivity of systems, if those systems are going to be put at more pressure because we have more frequent or more intense weather events, we want to understand the envelope of potential change. So understanding that and for our communities to understand that is that when we can try to lessen that impact for the future by ensuring that we have sustainable and resilient development and infrastructure. So the impacts of more frequent events over time become less. So that's where a lot of our focus will be, is to understand our systems and what adaptation we can have for the future.
So just on the comment you made there, so are we getting into the space as a region where we will be, through the regional plan, being more directive about where not to develop and to place infrastructure?
We need to be providing good, robust information to make good, robust decisions. So that decision making, I think, is through a collaborative process, and we are moving into a new space with our resource management reforms. So how that will be undertaken is still to be determined, but we need a good fundamental understanding of our systems to make those decisions.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, the regional policy statement is already has a number of provisions in it that are required to be given effect to by our district councils in relation to hazard management and land use.
Situation of a retreat in a whole lot of other areas. So I don't think that we're got to a mature level yet in our planning hierarchy. So yeah, I suppose it's work in progress.
Those discussions are already taking place in Karakia quite a bit. Me and myself and Patrick have had a few discussions about that already, and how that's now affecting Matamata Piako as well. So they're a lot of building permits are hitting these restrictions already, and there's a lot of community complaining. Where they were allowed to build easily before is not becoming so easily anymore. So yeah, it's a.
And I think for me, the West Coast communities and the river communities, particularly Huntly, going forward.
And Ben, another question.
Oh, just following up on what Noel's point was, to me, dealing with emergencies like we had in February is something that you get critically assessed for as a regional council. You can see that down in Hawke's Bay. So you'll be presumably coming to us for LTP processes on this. Yep. How does that fit in with the CDM? Because they're also asking for or requiring extra money.
Yeah, through the chair. So we have a very good relationship with Civil Defence, and Civil Defence key role is managing impact to people and property. So we as a council are providing the information to forewarn where those impacts may be. So we do work quite closely with Civil Defence. There is some overlap in terms of the roles of Civil Defence in terms of your risk reduction. But that risk reduction comes through a number of different avenues, and one of those avenues is obviously around making sure we don't build in silly places. So that ongoing reduction, risk reduction as well. So we are the regional council is a technical advisory group to the KEG, the coordinating executive group of Civil Defence. So we work very closely with them in terms of providing that technical basis to hazard and risk.
So, for example, the closure of the gates at Pairoa during the flood, is that us or is that CDM?
So that is us based on a predetermined triggers and action based on water level to close those gates. The impact and the the management of that action is then through civil defence, and the other key agency there is Waka Kotahi as well. And we work very closely with those agencies through a response.
And through you, Mr. Chair, there are a couple of items that to keep an eye out for in the long-term plan. We have mentioned the challenge of balancing emergency management responsibilities against progressing our resilience conversation. So that's an area that you'll see focus on. The other area is around information. We are an information collector to provide intelligence to other organisations about what's happening. And so you'll expect to see a case for some additional monitoring information coming through.
I have a few questions. When we were up the Coromandel the other day with Emily, she made it quite clear that monitoring is a real issue, and not so much with us, but our other bodies that we give information to actually stop us putting data collection in places that we need it done as well. So that becomes a real issue, that we want real life data and we can't put it where we want it. So I think we need to get those other groups in the room a bit more and understand we're actually trying to protect them as well. So why should there be such a great cost to the Waikato Regional Council for putting that data collection, yet they want us to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on traffic management to put that data collection there? Ridiculous, like I struggle with it. And the other thing, Rick, was just that I hope we're building enough resilience that sorry, I'll start again. The events that we had this summer were that big and long that you need to build resilience in your capability in your team, that we're not just doing this for a week. I think you're on active for nearly a month there at one stage or something, that, you're collecting a whole lot of data and analysing so much stuff all the time. And it's all about keeping communities safe and the public safe. So you have to be on your best game when you're doing that. So you got to build resilience in that team to make sure that we're getting the best information possible and predicting the best information possible. That's the worst bit. I think you're trying to predict it as well as give the real time data as well. So yeah, I thank you for all your efforts this summer. You guys did a really good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's very much appreciated, and very much a team effort through, from our zone staff on the ground through to what we do here in our nice warm dry base here. So thank you. The great team effort.
I'll move, Mr. Chair.
So
Just to acknowledge that yeah, depth is absolutely critical. And it goes beyond this committee because it's an organisational challenge in terms of having good, trained, experienced people who can step into these kind of roles that are so critical during these events. And that's a focus at the moment. We're looking at rolling out some increased training to really build that depth as an organisation. So not just Rick's team, not just ICM.
I'll have a seconder, please, to the page. All in favour? Thank you very much, guys. What's that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll now move on to river catchment planning. So two particular members of my senior leadership team will present this paper, Grant Blackie for Waikato West Coast, and we've got Emily O'Donnell online as well for Hauraki Coromandel. And as I said, we do have a number of staff online as well to answer any questions if we happen to go down their tracks. So thanks, Grant and Em.
Well, morning everyone. Kia ora tātou. Perhaps I'll start and Emily can chip in. I'll make a few summary comments just about the year that's been. To use a Rugby World Cup analogy, it has been a year of two halves. It was very dry leading into last winter and delayed planting enormously. So there was mopping up of planting, and then it was wet right through the summer, of course, and the two big storms, anniversary weekend and Cyclone Gabriel, which had a massive disruption on our BAU work program. most of that damage occurred in the southern and western parts of the region. Down around Taupo and the southern end of the lake there wasn't so much rain, but there was 5,000 hectares of pine trees flattened by the wind that came over the hill from Bay, which is a massive area. It was just like devastating to see. And that created quite a few issues for some of our flood protection schemes down there that had trees falling over in the lying in the wrong places. Despite the weather and so forth, we still managed to get through a lot of BAU work, and I just refer to page 106 of the agenda. The table there showing regional and zone by zone outputs of numbers, if you've got that handy. Now those are just the bald statistics, and so they don't paint a very rich picture. When you think about the 341 landowners that we've been working with, you know, the massive 230K of fencing. If you gross up that cost of fencing, it's around $5 million worth of fencing. To plant 1 million native plants is around $6 million worth of native planting and almost $1 million worth of poplar and willow poles. But, you know, you think about the individuals and the iwi groups and everyone we've been working with over the last year. And so the story is a lot richer than just a old table of numbers, but it's still an impressive table of numbers. One highlight, I suppose, is the continuation of our MPI-funded Hill Country Erosion Fund. So that was a new application for the next 4 years, or 23 to 27, where we successfully obtained another 2.86 million to essentially make it cheaper for landowners to do mitigation work on targeting hill country erosion. And that is in all of the zones except Upper Waikato and Taupo. I think that's probably just a quick summary. Taking the paper as read and happy to answer questions. But Emily, you'll have some comments from the Coromandel Hauraki area, presumably.
Ina mana ina rau rangatirama, tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou katoa. Kia ora team, and apologies for not being there in person today. And I can't blame road closures when it's such a beautiful day here in Whitianga. But I'm not wagging, I'm here with you, so thank you for that. I just want to acknowledge my partner in River and Catchment Crimes, Grant, for being with you in the room today. Look, it's no secret it's been a challenging year, and just building on some of the points Grant's raised, because you're going to hear more from me after Kerry, just really acknowledging the teams, both our core river and catchment teams, but also the support that we get from the likes of Rick's team and others across the organisation that allow our river and catchment teams to go out and do their jobs. You know, we can look at the statistics in the report, but I think it's really hard to capture the true richness that comes through the river and catchment activities, particularly in terms of the relationships and partnerships that are so critical to deliver our work, be it one-on-one with a landowner or with community groups, with iwi. That's where the real richness and essence of the work comes through, is that without that support and that buy-in from them, we can't go out and do that work. So I just really want to take the opportunity to acknowledge that. And like Grant, happy to take any questions.
We can have some questions now. There are a few slides highlighting a couple of particular projects, but we may go on to those after questions if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thanks, Grant, for the report. I suppose my query kind of comes into the river management expenditure and how it's allocated out. I just noticed that the upper Waikato is very low, and just with the obviously the weather events and, you know, the high amount of water going down the river, I feel as though whether that's something we need to address in the long-term plan, or whether it's the allocation through that whole graph, it needs. I feel as though more money needs to be put into that area, just, you know, with the devastation, as I said earlier, wetlands and erosion and stuff like that. So how is it proportioned out with the budget into all those areas, those different areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it is it's partly historical, but it's also related to where flood protection and other river management works are being funded. So there's a lot of zone by zone variation. So for example, you know, in Waiho, Piako, Lower Waikato, Taupo, there are existing flood protection schemes with river management programs attached to them, and the same with Coromandel. West Coast has only recently increased due to a larger program right across the board in the West Coast. Upper Waikato is fairly static and at a relatively low level, and it just reflects historical demand. So the budget for river management work, for actually doing work in Upper Waikato, is only $55,000 per year. And all that money relates to is essentially removal of obstructions in tributary streams in that zone and a bit of other sort of relatively minor work. It does not relate to any work on the main Waikato River. So we have no funding to do work on the main Waikato channel through that whole section. There is some erosion in some areas on the Waikato River, and there are complaints. There's some significant complaints around the River Road area that have been going on for 10 years plus, which the councillors down there are familiar with. So there is a lot of reasons for the variation. The mechanism for making adjustments is through the LTP. That is the mechanism. We're not proposing any adjustments in this LTP to increase river management budgets in Upper Waikato, for example. But we do have provision to move some money around within existing budgets and within our existing reserve down there to do more work in those tributary streams. So that is one provision.
Thanks, Grant. And I just feel, Mr. Chairman, that you know is way too light. So it's something that obviously we'll address in the long-term plan, hopefully.
Definitely, you know, make it clear that it's what you want, Mike, and hopefully we can get it past the rest of the councillors that that's what you want to do. If there's a good plan to how that can be better maintaining the areas on the Waikato, on the Upper Waikato, yeah.
No, thanks, Grant. Kia ora, Emily. No, it's a good report. I'm really happy with your guys' performance in the work program. I just had a couple of general questions on the budget. The way they're presented, I was just getting a bit confused. If I look at page 107 as an example, it talks about this is our full year budget, is it not? End of June, but then it talks about full year. See the gap there, full year budget and year to date budget. And I just want in year to date spend. I just wondered if we had the wrong budgets in here because it's the same with the maintenance one as well.
Year to date is to the end of June, so it is the full year expenditure. So sorry for that confusion.
So what does it mean by year to date budget then?
So sorry, that's so these charts are presented throughout the year as well.
Yeah.
And so what we try to show is where we expect to be with our budgets as we progress through the year,
Yeah.
as well as how we're progressing. So yeah, that's simply just an update of that key that's required.
I'm still confused, Greg. So you look at page 107, full year budget, and that little grey box in the middle there. It's got year to date budget. What's the difference in those two? Because we often review the full year budget partway through the system, but we're reporting at the end of the year, so you get one a bit confused. And then if you look at the second one, catchment maintenance expenditure, in the report it talks about Upper Waikato ending up the year 96% spent. Then on this, that's only showing about 75 or 80, you see. So I just wonder whether our finance people have given you guys the right graphs here, right? If that makes sense.
So through Mr. I can dig into that. What those charts are showing is that we had a full year budget, which is the lighter colour, and the dark is the expenditure against that budget.
Yeah, but Stu's point, if I can, is that by June, full year, that light grey year to date should actually be full year. So the grey, it should be a fully grey box progressively through, and then the black shows the actual expenditure. So,
and that's what you can see on all of them. So throughout the year, you'd have, for example, with these charts on 107, you'd see the light green progressively making its way up the charts
Yep.
to reflect the year-to-date budgets. For all these charts, you see that the light green is at the top of the chart, so it's equal to the full year budget.
Yeah, but what Stu's point is, and I absolutely support him, is that light grey should be a solid box by year end. So that's showing a point in time, which I would have expected just over halfway through the year. Depending on the activity, it could be 3/4 spent, who knows, by, but it's not reflective. And I looked at those myself and thought, really not sure what's going on here.
So through you, that's just the key there, the grey box. The actuals are in the coloured bars. But look, I'm happy to take that away as an action from today, because it's important that we're able to communicate where
Misleading,
we're at
that
with this.
box.
Yeah. No
I
problem.
mean, on that second one, the report in there says the Upper Waikato maintenance is at 96% spent, and I'm sure Grant knows, but yet on this bar, if you look at Upper Waikato, that's only about 75. Yeah. Yeah, so I think your finance people might have given you the wrong one.
If
no,
I can, Mr. Chairman, just to give hopefully some clarity. So there's some additional figures that come through into these as well. So these draw on labour. So the commentary is correct, but the graphs often pull together a number of other factors. So the actual program may have been 96%, but we may have been underspent in labour or other factors that applied to it. But it is a confusing way to show it. But the text is, I guess, the key part, because like I say, the graphs pull in other information as well. So it gives the total spend allocated to that program, which might include management oversight, labour, and then the direct costs. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Emily. Yeah.
Just to clarify for me then, so if we look at Waipa on page 107, does that mean that Waipa was underspent by $200,000 from its actual?
I'll get Kerry's online to answer that, but it does say in the commentary, the reasons for that being mainly staff gaps, but Kerry can expand on that.
Yeah, Morena koutou. So yes, that's correct. That's the whole of the Waipa Catchment Plan and Catchment New Works budgets being underspent. And the driver for that, as explained in the text, was we had a number of staff vacancies throughout the year, and the allocated management costs that go along with it. Often, if you're not spending the whole labour, you've got a large associated allocated management cost that's not spent as well, the overheads, and hence that's why it's a couple of $100,000.
Thank you.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Grant, thank you for your report. I'm really interested in the impact that this report is demonstrating, and I just wanted to help understand a couple of elements of it. So on the page 106, table 1, is that the information that was also the information reported in the media release earlier in the year, which talked about the extent of planting and stuff? There was a really good media release that came out, must be almost 3 months ago, I think. So is this the sort of data that informed that media release? Is this the data for this year? Because the media release covered off a whole series of years of work that had been done by the regional council.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. The media release was based on prior data, and this is the most recent year's data. So there will be, I imagine we will be using this sort of data in future media releases. So this is the latest data.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. So I just wanted to explore a couple of things then about the data, because again, I think the impact of it, I think it's pretty major. So look, do you go back? So you talk in the table here about the numbers of plants you've planted. What monitoring is undertaken to determine survival rates and stuff like that?
Yeah, right. So we do, through our funding arrangements with MPI and so forth, we do have requirements to go back 6 months or so after the last planting to check on survival rates, and the typical measure is an 80% survival rate. Yeah. So that's typically what we're aiming for. If there are reasons why there can be a whole lot of reasons why you might get deaths, poor planting, poor plants, climatic reasons, whatever they might be. If we don't get enough plants in a particular block, we can look at, supplementing the planting or doing blanking in the following winter as an option.
Yeah, well, that's good. So just my final point then is I'm interested in how this work interacts with our state of the environment reporting, because as we all know, in the last state of the environment report, there were all the statistics in there about the loss of habitat and the continuing fragmentation of habitat across the region. And I'm just wondering whether this other side of the balance sheet is being fully linked in to the state of the environment reporting. In other words, at what point would you guys incorporate this into SOE reporting as in terms of increasing the area of Indigenous dominated habitat in the region and the connectivity as opposed to the fragmentation that goes on when people clear this sort of, native forest or whatever? So is it incorporated in that way into the SOE reporting?
No, it's not at the moment. There's a bunch of things that come out of your comments. Measuring the impacts. And so, I mean, the work for a start is not being done to enhance or improve biodiversity values as the primary objective. That is a secondary objective, but the primary one is to improve water quality and reduce sediment predominantly, and with biodiversity benefits as a secondary benefit, if you like. And we do work in with our biodiversity teams on particular projects with biodiversity co-benefits as a separate thing. Measuring the benefits of this work is complicated and difficult and is not picked up through SOE type monitoring. Our science people do have a monitoring program which targets this work to see if they can more directly identify benefits relating to this work, which is separate from SOE monitoring. Even that is proving difficult because of the costs, the complexity, the time lags, and the size of the catchments. So if you have a really small catchment, say 5 or 10 hectares, and you started monitoring water quality and you did work, you could measure changes quite quickly. But as soon as you start to increase your catchment sizes and with land use changes, it becomes very complex and difficult. And so we are not in a very good place to say these are the benefits of this work directly. On the one hand, in terms of water quality, and on the other hand, in terms of fragmentation of biodiversity and how this might be improving that situation, where we've got a fair way to go there as well, be fair to say.
Yeah, so cause and effect, of course, is very difficult and complex to measure, but the point I'm also trying to make is that of course, a change in extent and fragmentation are quite broad variables which are currently used in the SOE. I'm just trying to understand about whether we are appropriately recognising the positive side of the balance sheet. So even with the difficulties relating to the complexity and the demonstration of cause and effect, are we feeding this stuff into SOE in a way that is showing the improvement in change in extent, for example?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we can seek some more clarity on that for the committee. I think it would be worthwhile.
Yeah. Now, because again, we need to gain recognition, proper recognition for everything that we're doing. And that's the point I'm making about this valuable work.
So, Mr. Chairman, just adding to that point, this is reflecting what council is involved in. What about the huge amount of work that's being done by landholders, which in isolation from council, that would also or should also be captured? And I don't know whether that's too hard a thing to try and capture, but maybe a voluntary basis that people could report into somewhere. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I'm just looking at Grant and Kerry more. I recall Vaughan, when he was CEO, pushing for a project along the lines of what Noel was just mentioning. Where's that ended up? Does anyone know?
Yeah, I can respond to that through the chair. So that was colloquially known as the bubble project, because you'd click on bubbles and they would show different things that had happened in different areas. That project didn't progress for whatever reason, but essentially it was trying to pull together all the data into a interactive graphic, if you like. So anybody could click on different parts of the region and then drill down to what's happening in my area, and it would show different things in terms of planting and fencing and whatever else. So a prototype was done, but it never developed for whatever reason. I can't remember the exact reasons, but yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, the River Authority has a system that they use to keep track of all the projects they contribute to, and bearing in mind that the River Authority is one contributor to a particular project on a farm. We're one contributor to a project. Often the WRA and ourselves and MPO or contributors as well. It gets a bit tricky because we all understandably want to advertise the fact that we're all contributing to all this stuff. But I've often wondered whether the information we're going to get through whole farm plan registrations might also be another mechanism where we can. I don't know, but again, I do think it's something that we collectively should all be working towards. And I would imagine that different players are probably using different platforms as well, which is going to make it even blooming harder. But yeah, there's certainly, I think the information is going to be available once everyone's registered with their farm plans, but whether it's relatable in a useful format, I don't know, but yeah.
Absolutely support where Bruce is coming from, and if there's a way in which we can capture that through some portal or otherwise.
Just I'd support it as well, but actually, funny enough, we're down at Paparoa on the Karakia Plains the other day at the bird site, and believe it or not, Chris Hughes was exactly saying this thing as well. That why aren't we capturing this? So it's interesting.
And I mean, you've got to be careful. I mean, Taranaki Regional Council are really good at boasting about how good they've been. You go down there, they talk about how all their streams are fenced. You go down there and bloody half the fences cross the corner on the stream because they're about that far away from the edge, which is blooming hopeless, you know. So it's not something I want us to be boasting about.
No.
So, and I guess one of the risks there is, I have no doubt that Grant and Gary and Co will report quite accurately. But the minute you get farmers to report on what they've done, you need some sort of mechanism to audit it, which I guess is potentially that farm planning process.
But yeah, but if you look at the numbers, that even the fencing, the fencing of 22,000 or nearly 23,000 kilometres, that's how many animals is that keeping out of waterways every day?
Well, it is, but
and how much of that was old fencing that's been replaced, and how much of it's new?
Yeah, and again, some projects for a given amount, let's just say 10 k's of fencing, you might get X of planting.
Yeah.
Because of the contour. Other projects, you might get a whole lot more restoration from that same level of planting. So one of the stats I've often wondered about, and I don't know whether it's right, is whether you have a percentage of retired area proportional to how much fencing's happened, you know, because we had this argument years ago when we started Whitehall Land Care, because some people were effectively losing regional council subsidies to subdivide their big paddocks. Which is not our role, you know. Yeah. I mean, guys that have got really extensive 20 acre paddocks, it's not our job to subdivide those.
No.
So we need to be quite careful how we apply our funding.
Just one thing I would say is we are capturing the information. So all of the fences are in a GIS layer and they're all mapped and everything is captured. All the data, all the work we're doing is captured. So it's not a question of that we're not capturing the information. I think the issue raised is how we might be using that information or not using it.
Would you like to, Tipper, would you like to speak on that you just sent in, please?
Oh, no, I'm just adding to the debate about how we can improve and consolidate our information, I think. I'm just saying, I think FMU planning will invite other types of information into the matrix, and then that might help us smooth it out to your point, Bruce. How do we align all the information to give a more accurate picture of the impact we're having? Thank you.
Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so that was a bit of a general overview of the program, but we do have a couple of projects, one on the Waikato, one on the Hauraki to quickly run through. So I think Kerry was going to join us first, Grant.
Yeah,
To
if we
talk
could
about
put-
Ngāwai Waikato.
If we could put those slides up. Please. One moment.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Again, it's Kerry Nelson here. I'm the Waipahu West Coast Zone Manager, but also was the sponsor for the Waikato West Coast Shovel Ready restoration projects. And so these are now, for the majority, coming to a close. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity to just highlight some of the larger ones. So from the Waikato West Coast side of things, by far our largest project was the Ngāwai or Waikato project, which was a 3-year project focusing on reducing hill country and stream bank erosion in the catchments of significant lakes and wetlands in the lower Waikato zone, particularly focusing on increasing the resilience of those catchments to climate change, and reducing sediment to those sensitive areas, and then of course retaining and creating new jobs. So it was around about a $7 million project over the 3 years, with about half of that money coming from MB through the Climate Resilience Program, 1.35 million from the WRA, and around $500,000 from MPI, and then the rest was through Regional Council's Catchment New Works program. So just completed the 3rd year. If we can go to the next slide. So in terms of what we aimed to achieve for the project versus where we're at now, this table outlines that. So the various actions that were eligible for funding are on the left-hand side. The goal at the project commencement is in the middle column, and then on the left is what we've achieved after 3 years. So for the most part, we have significantly exceeded our targets for this program. The only one that we came a little bit under there was the kilometres of fencing to retire hill country and riparian margins. But as you can see, the area retired was around 5 times more than our target. So what that means essentially is that for less fencing, farmers were prepared to target bigger areas than we anticipated when we started out. We almost doubled the number of plants we anticipated, 3 times the hectares that we were going to plant, a lot more poles and area treated. River erosion control structures were predominantly rock and vegetation groins. And in terms of the job creation, we aimed for 30 full-time equivalent jobs for that $7 million program, and so far we've had the equivalent of 36 full-time jobs. So there's still a little bit of extra work to go between now and the end of October, with a bit more late season planting in wetter areas and some plant releasing, but for the most part the project is complete. We've also come under budget by around about $500,000 spread across those funders. If we can go to the next slide, I've just got some examples of the type of works that have been undertaken. So a large component of the project was afforestation. We had funding for both exotic and native afforestation. Where we did native afforestation, it was predominantly manuka or kanuka, but with up to a 20% composition with long-lived mixed natives to help with that reversion over the long term to native cover. And pretty much focused on class 6E7 hill country and those catchments. Next slide.
Gary, just on that previous slide, how long had those hills been in pasture?
Yeah, for a very long time. So for the most part, since the 40s, 50s. So we're talking more than 50 years, some even longer.
That's right, because the 70s Muldoon had a program of stripping the hills and for grass, but just wondered whether it was recent or further back. So thanks.
Yeah, no, it was through that reversion, creating more area for sheep and beef grazing. We've done a lot of open space pole planting. That's something that we've really upped the ante on in our program across the region actually this year. We're showing here some examples in the Matahuru, Ōpōtia and Nike catchments addressing those slips. And of course, we've got a lot more of that to do after those summer events as well. Access to poles is going to be an upcoming challenge for us. We're lucky to have a local provider, but definitely all regional councils were after more poles this year. Next slide. So the river management and repair and restoration component, that included some vegetation management where there was vegetation that was causing blockages or exacerbating erosion, fencing with large setbacks. You can see there we're looking for a minimum of a 5 metre setback, planting with natives, and then some gradient control structures. So an example there on the lower photo where we are protecting an oxbow from breaking through. And just at the left-hand side of that oxbow, you can see a little riffle. That's a gradient control structure that's been put in the stream to prevent stream bed degradation. When the stream degrades, it causes the banks to slump and you get more erosion overall. So we put in these little weirs, little gradient controls that help maintain the stream bank and also provide additional habitat, some diversity of habitat for fish species as well. And that's all been planted up. So in a few years, we'll go back and get some more drone footage, and I suspect it'll be looking like quite a different situation. Next slide. And then jobs. So we were really successful through this program because a lot of it was just focused on the ground work and creating those jobs, focused on people growing plants, planting them, and then maintaining them, doing weed control. So you can see some of the people out on the ground doing the work, hard work on those hills. But by all accounts, people learning new skills and really satisfied with the work they undertook. We also had a Waikato Tainui Catchment Restoration Officer funded through this position. That role is now finished, but that person has got a full-time job in the Waipa zone now. We had Waikato Tainui interns each year as well, so those were jointly appointed. We're continuing with Ngāwai or Waikato at a smaller scale with MPI, WRC and WRA funding that we secured last year and this year. And that internship program will be continuing as part of that as well. So we're hoping that some of the skills and jobs that have been created through this program will be able to be supported through an ongoing project. Thank you.
I just had a brief comment on this slide because this is the photo we just got hold of yesterday from some recent drone footage, and it just shows the impact of the Auckland anniversary rain down by Aria, 135 mils on a smallish area over 3 to 4 hours. And not very common we get this kind of mass wasting erosion in our region, but with heavier rainfalls into the future. This is particular geology, weathered sandstone with shallow ash over the top of it. It just has really fallen apart. And you can see in the little photo in the bottom right there, that was a slip that occurred about 10 years ago, which was planted up with poplar poles around the edge, nearby to the area that has eroded. There are some poplar poles on the actual slope that is eroded. There's a few through the middle there, but it shows you just how vulnerable some of these landscapes can be to too much rain.
Yeah, it's an interesting photo. I drive to Taranaki quite a bit, and there's still people on that area around Mount Messenger, which is, I assume it's pretty similar sort of soil type. Still using a helicopter to spray manuka back every couple of years, and it's just criminal away and insane, eh? And I kind of wonder whether it's time to have some more stringent rules in our regional plan to stop people from doing that as well. It's free revegetation, by nature.
Yeah, I mean, that's my main comment on that image there. That should be covered in permanent native forest, all of it.
We want to move on to Emily Now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Grant and Kerry. Pretty heart-wrenching that last photo, and different geology on the Coromandel, but areas particularly in the north looking similar to that. Mr. Chairman, just want to check in terms of timing, that you were still happy to proceed.
Thank you. Carry on, Emily. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And William, I'll be handing over to you to, we thought we'd take a slightly different approach with this and take you on a bit of a journey in Manaia. So we're going from a huge shovel-ready project and over massive catchments to a small little community cloaked in native and steeped in history and home to the Manaia Cody Sanctuary. So we're going to take you to Coromandel's west coast, and hopefully, William, the technology is going to work for us. And if you could bring up the other presentation, please, that's got the drone footage in it. We thought if we can't get you out on site, we'll pop you in a little drone and show you some of the catchment.
Bring it up.
Thank you.
Bring up the other presentation now.
Thank you.
Just while they're organised, Tracy May and I went to Otorohanga Council the other day, identical machines to this, and 3 of us at one table like this, and they worked perfectly. So we took photos of their machines and brought them home, and I was just having a look at my photos, and they're identical to these.
Right, ready when you are, William, to hit play.
Sorry, just to confirm, this is the correct footage you want?
Yes, correct. Thank you. So welcome to Manaia, councillors. So Manaia is a small, largely Māori community on our west coast here on the Coromandel. It's a community that the team here have had interactions with for a good 20 plus years. So I'm just going to cover off some of the background, achievements and challenges and lessons from this work here at Manaia. So this project was one our team were working on before Shovel Ready and the opportunity with the cash came along. It was originally pitched as a 10-year project, but the funding from Te Rākau meant that this could largely be fast-tracked into a 3-year program of work with total expenditure of about 1.2 million, about 850k from Te Rākau. So this was interesting in that it sat outside TUR's traditional interests of largely tree planting, but what captured them was the genuine involvement of iwi. So those that whakapapa to this area and are haukainga here are Ngāti Pukenga, Ki Manaia, Ngāti Whanaunga, Ngāti Maru and Ngāti Tamatara. So the works here were 100% funded, and you'll see as the footage goes along a number of examples of where river management and restoration work have been carried out. So in terms of some highlights, and keeping in mind that this is a really small catchment, so around 40,000 plants have been planted, 6.6 k's of new fencing, 5 staff were employed full-time through a contractual agreement with Ngāti Whanaunga. The aim was originally 4, plus additional employment through contractors. There was a lot of training to staff, and so this has increased local capacity and capability, and we're seeing through that with some additional contractors we've now got on that side of the peninsula, which is fantastic. 3 whānau home nurseries were established, and so this was additional training into that community as well, where they were taught to source and propagate the plants, and 12,000 plants from that specifically have gone in the ground in the catchment. We've got a new real-time gauge for rainfall that it's located here. And if you're familiar or try and come to the peninsula from time to time, you'll know that through this part, just south of Coromandel here at Manaia, that often goes underwater the road. So this will give us some great information as to what's happening there. And as part of that, our awesome EnviroSchools team have worked with the Kuta so that they can look to use that monitoring information and incorporate it into their curriculum. There's a new pest control network and, as seen, quite extensive river works. So like all good projects, it wasn't without its challenges. And some of those were, things like trying to identify owners and contact points when you've got multiple ownership with Māori land. I guess working in COVID times saw a really heightened sense of mistrust. Meeting our usual landowner agreements were met with concerns, and this was sort of fueled further through legacy issues from the Crown. There was a number of incidents, which included the team being trespassed. There was a firearms incident and threats to the locally employed team, as well as the discovery of a couple of archaeological sites. Around about this time, the project was paused for 6 weeks, and we learnt while it's easy to pause a project, it's really hard to get it going again. And it rained a lot. But despite this, when you talk to our core team, both internally and externally, if the opportunity came up to do it all over again, everyone would be back in there, boots and all. There's some really great lessons from this project that will enhance our project management planning and how we engage with our communities. Some of those are how we consider, when we're doing our planning, the consideration of cultural events and the impact that can have on time. It likely won't impact the end goal, but it can be disruptive at the time. Though we never did anticipate the impact of a whale on the project and record rainfall. We may have to start including that in our risk registers. Engagement really needs to be continuous, particularly in really dynamic communities and led locally. No matter how great our relationship is, there's nothing like having people who live there in the community to lead that. There's a lack of documented history in terms of the whenua, the land around Manaia. So there's real opportunity for sharing that. Contracts with Tūrarako and then in turn our long-term contractors didn't allow for cost or inflation increases. So this actually put additional pressure on our suppliers. Just noting the incredible amount of goodwill required from iwi and the community, as well as WRC, that went into this. And Ngāti Whanaunga and Ngāti Pukenga ki Manaia, their large contribution of time that was not paid for. And we haven't, we don't necessarily have a real appreciation for how significant that is. But that knowledge sharing and exchange with our project leaders was just so incredibly invaluable. So as I mentioned, we've worked locally with Ngāti Whanaunga and Pukenga for decades. And I think this was really shown through the project and in the really honest conversations we've been able to have, and a commitment to despite some pretty significant challenges, to keep moving forward together. And I guess I'd like to then, just at this point, to acknowledge, particularly with those relationships, Harry and Ruth Makaire from Ngāti Pukenga ki Manaia, and Honey and Mike Baker from Whanaunga, for their unwavering support and belief in this project. And happy to take any questions.
I don't have any questions, just really, really good report, Emily. It's good to see. The drone's a good way of sharing it with us, so thank you.
Thanks, Stu. I'm just pleased the tech worked. Quietly relieved right now.
Yes. Say something. Emily, that was a very professional report. I think everyone enjoyed that around the table here right now, around council table. That was the village that we were going to visit on the bus trip if we ended up in the Coromandel. Is that right?
Yeah, it's correct.
Yeah, thank you. So when we talked about having the trip around the Coromandel, that was one of the communities we were going to go and visit. So.
Can I just take the opportunity to thank Emily and her team for the hospitality they provided to Robbie and myself when we went up last month. Excellent field trip and really got to the nub of some of the issues up there. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Noel. Really appreciate that. And you guys are welcome back anytime. Just make sure Robbie packs appropriate footwear, please.
And next time we'll make sure we bring some other councillors up that they can appreciate the work you're doing up there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, so we'll now move on to our flood protection land drainage. So we have, as we usually do, a general update on that activity, showing you progress against our operational and capital programs. And then we do have a focus on our Pathways to the Sea project, which is a critical project for council moving into new space with its infrastructure. So I welcome Dave and Adam to the table, who I know you know well, and pass over to them.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Tēnā koutou, everyone. I will take the report as read, Mr. Chairman, but I just want to take the opportunity to make a few observations, if I may. I guess it will come to no surprise to the committee that the 22-23 year, as previously reported, was a pretty demanding, challenging year for the team. We had several storm events, including several cyclones, and many of which were back to back. So that did create quite a bit of challenge to continue on and also to meet our BAU requirements. But despite those events, and as you'll see in the report, the zone teams delivered a revised but still significant capital and operational program, including supporting the tranche of shovel-ready projects, which has been listed in Appendix 1, and just like to acknowledge Julie for providing that. Disaster recovery costs are still being collated, and we will report on those at a later date. But on a more positive note, I have to be careful, choose my words here carefully, Mr. Chairman, but the rain tap looks like it's been turned down a little bit. I'm reluctant to say that it's been turned off, because I would certainly hate to jinx it. But I guess I just want the committee to know also that while we are going into a bit of a different phase weather-wise, ground conditions do remain poor. And so what that has meant is that it's created a bit of a longer tail to the events. So many of you will have, and even just having a bit of a coffee catch-up around the traps, I'm hearing that there was still quite high groundwater. And so that has impacted on our ability to do earthworks and also to access some of our sites. So that's something that the team have been having to work around as well. Just in regarding to the land drainage activity, similar to the flood protection area, the team did struggle to keep things on track due to the ongoing poor weather conditions and the ground conditions. So not only was it wet, it was also very windy, which means that we were unable to meet some of our spray targets. So the team will be looking forward to a much drier and less windier summer to do a bit of a catch up on that. There were several service level complaints received from landowners over the storms and across both the flood schemes and land drainage. They were thoroughly investigated, and the result of those investigations showed that none were upheld, which meant that the schemes overall, despite the magnitude of the rain and the level of flood water levels experienced, the schemes performed really well. So that's a pat on the back to the teams and also to the flood schemes. I guess yeah, it's fair to say that we have actually had quite a lot of other things going on, Mr. Chairman, that we're having to weigh up. But I just wanted to acknowledge also the support of this committee over the last 12 months as well. Many of you have been out and about having a look at the damage, supporting the teams, sending messages of support. And so we just wanted to acknowledge, and that's on behalf of the operational teams, particularly across the Lower Waikato and Waihiapiako, who continue to do flood recovery work in that space. So that I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any slides to support the paper today, because I wanted to give my colleague here, Dave, who's helping with this report as well, a little bit more time to talk about the Pathways to the Sea. But I'm happy to pause at this point and take any questions. And also I have the zone managers online who might be able to assist in any responses. Thank you.
There's a couple of issues which probably need to be taken offline, but it's the level of service issues in relation to encroachment by urbanisation of the often headwaters or thereabouts of the drainage systems. Certainly think we should be getting together politically and operationally to get our thoughts around what should be happening. I think that needs to happen sooner than later. I do notice in different reports and so on that the issue has been identified, but I'd like to get some discussion going fairly soon on what our plan is and how to address it, so that politically and operationally, we are of the one mind before we progress too much further. And obviously, those issues are causing substantial issues for some of the TAs as well. And we need to work out where our land drainage, particularly in Waikato, my constituency, but there are others across the region that need to be sorted. The other issue I've got, which will be taken offline, is that having been involved in several instances recently, I am seriously concerned about how we are operating operationally and the time it's taking to do certain things and the cost of that to the targeted ratepayer. So I won't go into specifics because I think it's inappropriate just yet to go there, but there are a number of instances where I see waste and that is being a direct cost to targeted ratepayers. So Greg, I would like to spend some time, and probably Robbie, on this issue going forward. And if you want to include others in that, but I'll give you a heads up. It is of serious concern, and I know other councils have got the issue about costs and how we can reduce those. So otherwise, good report. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, the team certainly has worked above and beyond this year. I keep regular contact with Steve and the team out at Torotū and the other zone managers. You're all doing a good job, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Noel.
I just support what Noel said then, and the expansion of Morrinsville's got quite shocking how it's already at the Morrinsville Tahuna Road in the industrial area. And I know most of that is most probably in the boundary of the council, but of the TA, but we'll definitely get blamed for it. So we need to be, myself and Adam have spoken about this in the past, but yeah, this is happening in all our regions and all our TAs, and it's serious because we don't realise how quickly they are intruding, and it's at a massive speed. Yeah.
So just on that, so those of you who don't realise, the expansion of the urban network, dwellings and the light industrial into the rural drainage networks, we have a level of service of clearing the water, the ponding within 3 days. But of course, industrial and certainly dwellings don't like seeing water coming up at their front doors at a great rate of knots. So that the competing interests there, and of course, the rural landowners don't want to be contributing to an increase in costs to service dwellings, and we've got to find alternative ways. And I know with the city we've done that historically, although there's some big push to put more water into the Comac from the eastern side of the city. That water at Hillcrest ends up at Taupere through the rural drainage channels. So and that's all flat land basically to Taupere. We cannot take the water into these rural drainage networks, and we've got to do this sooner rather than later. It's imperative that we do. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, just in response to that, we are working on a land drainage policy which will help provide some guidance for council in that respect, and we will be reporting that on later when that's finalised.
Finalised through you, Mr. I would certainly like to see that and be involved in some of that with Robbie particularly. Thank you.
Yeah. Pippa, would you have your question, please?
No, just in support of where Noel was going, if we could talk about those matters, because I think it's come up all today. Where's the LOS going to sit? What is BAU? How do we plan in random weather events? So I'm not sure what I'm asking for, but it is some kind of conversation about level of service as a result in this catchment. But we got plenty of time for that before LTP. So just wanted to support those. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, connect what we're now discussing with what happened yesterday in the meeting with the City Council, because there clearly are some competing and different views around the service level agreements in relation to this central zone. And I'm just wanting to make sure we're going to stay on top of that, really. Yeah.
You know, that's why I did actually want to be on that committee, but for other reasons that I won't go into, I was excluded.
Stu?
Thanks, Adam. No, this is a really good report with heaps of detail. Hey, the policy for self-administration, that's 6 months away or something, is it?
That is imminent, through you, Mr. Chairman, and we will be coming back through councillors in due course to
Oh,
have
cool.
that conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I can't help but think about the very lax response we got to work on our subcommittees, and I guess a thing for me is making sure that that policy is really clear about what people are getting into, because I'm not so sure that there's as much support out there for self-administration as what some of the more vocal individuals might suggest, but we need to go through a process, and so looking forward to that. And just on that subject that Noel was talking about, I noticed too in Fencourt, there's people are now in these really low-lying areas that I imagine are part of the Fencourt scheme. They just bring in thousands of tons of blimmin' soil and building them up and then plonking houses on them as well. And I'm not sure if they're obliged to connect with us before they start doing that, but
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, that's a really good point, Stu. I met with Waikato District Council yesterday just in respect to creating a bit more of a connection similar to what we have with Hauraki, with the drainage network, and making sure that we are being proactive rather than being reactive and identifying those opportunities where we do get a heads up on a consent application or been any modification done to the drainage network.
yeah.
So we're starting to get into that bit of space.
This is
yeah.
is Waipa.
Oh, it's why, sorry, what
Yeah,
I would be
right,
thinking of. Yeah, cool.
Fencourt
Yeah.
just out of Cambridge, and
Mm.
I don't know for sure, but just looking at where they're doing it, it won't be triggering any slope rules. So yeah, make sure that they are connecting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
That
good point.
that particular network's just going to get harder and harder to manage with all the rural residential stuff that's going in there.
Only thing I'd like to add is just that it was obvious in Gabriel that when work programs actually get delayed, and then weed control then causes other erosion issues, which we saw drains getting washed out and houses getting inundated with water that's never been inundated with water before because the weed was blocking drains and things. So I think looking back, we should have foreseen that we should have been doing a lot more cleaning and not worrying about weed spraying when we already were backlogged with spraying for a year. Before that, we should have gone, stuff it, let's get into doing some drain cleaning, a weed removal instead of spraying because we weren't going to get on control of it. So that's most probably not, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just inside of what took place. And I imagine you guys have gone through that and analysed that information as well, that when we get a weed program that's getting behind, we actually physically have to do something about it faster than worrying about spraying. And it's just, you know where I'm coming from with that. I think I don't have to go into too more depth. It definitely showed in the Thames Valley drainage network that was a real issue. Most probably because we got such contained drains without really any floodplain, and then all of a sudden it just goes into washouts and roads got washed and washed out and all sorts of things. So yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, if there's no other, I think there's a separate vote, so we'll clear off this particular paper and then we'll move on to the next one, which is Pathways to the Sea. So, Mr. Chairman, by way of introduction, so Dave, and welcome Peter Searle to the table as well. He is our team leader, environment compliance, and it's his team who's managing this particular project. It's a multi-year project that council has been working on, half funded by council, half funded by a number of other parties, which is really positive. And it is looking at a variety of ways that council needs to respond to what are a variety of legislative requirements in terms of how we operate our existing flood protection infrastructure. Thanks, Dave and Peter.
Thanks, Greg. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the author of this report, who's currently away in Canada on a well-earned holiday, Michelle White. So she's been leading this project on our behalf and done a fantastic job. As Greg mentioned, it's 4 years in the running with COVID issues affecting the timing of that to some degree. However, the revised timing, we're happy that we're back on track. We're probably about halfway, or just over halfway through the program. We had a successful tag and I guess a tag and release activity at the beginning of this season. We did manage to get that in before the bad weather affected everything. So I'm accompanied today by Peter Searle. Peter's recently joined my team from the RUD Directorate. So it's been great to have his experience and perspectives on things in that team. Michelle's been working with Alicia Williams and with Steve Hall, our reliability engineer. They've done a phenomenal job to bring this to the point that we're at today. You probably see we've got some models here which give some illustration of some of the work that's being done, and we're yet to see the results of this particular pump type. So we can talk about that one a wee bit later. I think the pump's actually being assembled this week. So looking forward to seeing that. Anyway, I'll hand over to Peter. Peter will talk through a few slides that we've got, which just give some further background to this project.
Tēnā koutou, good morning. So Pathways to the Sea, obviously we've got a number of legislative considerations for this project. You see up there the NPS, or National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, sets out the objectives and policies for under RMA, the Resource Management Act. Need to manage freshwater in a way that gives effect to Te Mana o Te Wai, and identify the works and target outcomes for fish abundance and diversity, and fish passage, and address in-stream barriers. And you'll see that the model in that picture there, probably the crucial part is in the bottom right, where the blue arrow is. So when fish enter the current pumps, if you like, at the moment, the mortality rate is great on some of them, some cases 100% mortality. So the move to Pathways to the Sea and the designs of these prototypes is to create a different edge or support so that the fish can pass through without being cut up into pieces. Next slide, please. So National Policy Statement 1.6, our local authorities must use the best information available at the time, using complete and scientifically robust data and all practical steps to reduce uncertainty. And so these pump designs are the best we have at this particular point in time. We're not saying that's necessarily the be all and end all. It's certainly open to reviewing different techniques and different ideas moving forward. But at this time, that's what we've got, and we're looking to implement to help us stay in line with the intent of the legislation. Next slide, please. So NES, National Environmental Standards, so the freshwater requirements for carrying out certain activities pose risk to freshwater and the freshwater ecosystem. So the MBEA section 50, it hasn't in effect for this council region yet, but that also talks about not just maintaining, we don't want to go backwards, but obviously enhancing the ecosystems as well. so to protect the natural wetlands, obviously, protect urban and rural streams from infilling and ensure the connectivity of the fish habitat and fish passage. So the photos here is some of the tuna being, or eels being tagged and monitored and recorded. And so that just helps, that's just some of the monitoring and testing of those different areas that we need to monitor and test, and checking that fish mortality and injury rates and things like that. Next slide, please. So the bottom, the left-hand project is pretty much this prototype here. Be that way and you're looking. So that's just one of the pump designs that will help us to achieve those legislative requirements. And obviously this one here is the right-hand photo is just another mock-up model of that pump. It actually probably goes in place this way. Just there for stability, it actually would sit this way as it operates from there. This one will be installed into the Huntley Golf Course spring this year. And then obviously from that, we need to monitor the fish friendliness from that and make sure that it is doing the job right. I think that's the last slide. So I've nothing further unless you have questions. Thank you.
One comment I would make before we go to questions, Mr. Chair, if I may. So this pump is, it's one of a number of work streams you can see within Pathways to the Sea, because there are certainly a number of solutions that we can apply in terms of improving our performance around fish passage. There are a number of partners involved in this project. This particular one has gone through a substantial R&D process through Callaghan Innovation, Auckland University, scale models, rubber eels, all sorts of things to ultimately get to what you see here. So I guess the team have done everything they can to have some confidence in the outcomes that we'll get. But ultimately, the proof is in this final stage, and it will be going into Auckland University for some final scale testing before going out to the Huntley Golf Course pump station.
I've got a couple. So the new pump is going to be monitored for the new McEwen for fish mortality, and so what is likely to be the mortality rate that's acceptable and what isn't acceptable? Is it zero or it's all?
I'll try and answer that, and I think, to be honest, the answer is very uncertain. Our key requirement is that we enhance, and that means we need to understand what the mortality is before we make a change. What I think is clear from the legislation reading that we've had is we cannot replace like for like. So we can't just take an existing Pluga pump or a Bedford and just simply replace it. We have to enhance. So that's where the challenge is. This particular pump is an axial type, so this is to really give us an option for those installations. The Archimedes type is obviously another alternative, and then we're looking at Bedfords as well. So the legislation, I think, is fairly clear now.
Because and when you're looking at the Archimedes, because we've got that group up at Magara, I can't say it. Motorcracker.
Yeah.
It's looking at using a different sort of Archimedes screw, even though the inlet into the pump looks identical to the one that we're promoting at the moment. I'd like to understand, and it can be taken offline out of here as well, but I'm sure Chris wants to understand, and most probably Noel, of where is the mortality? Is it actually on while it's operating up the screw, or where? Because if the inlet is the same, like you just mentioned before, that it's not likely that fish are going to get killed entering the pump. So when you value what the capability of the pump is, how do we assess it? Because otherwise we can't. And the problem is, if we can't go and use a different sort of pump, how can we assess if it's going to be capable of doing what it's doing or not? And so you got this group going, well, we can buy a pump for $500,000 cheaper that looks to do the same job, but you know where I'm coming from.
Yep. So through you, Mr. Chair, we obviously conducted a trap and tag and release program so we can understand what the mortality was through through the new pump, and then obviously we compare that with previous examples. What we're seeing with that is the Archimedes pump that you've just mentioned, the Motor Karakia one, similar to Mangatawhiri 3. The mortality is caused both at the entrance and through the course of the screw. So we've seen damage and death all the way through that screw. It's not just simply at the entrance to the screw.
So the mortality is also while it's climbing up
Yep.
the wall, as the screw pump's taking it up, there's mortality they're getting.
Yeah, there's
And-
several entrapment points as we go up that screw.
Yeah. So that's the sort of, because what you're saying is if an Archimedes without a fixed chamber that's spinning with the pump is going to cause mortality. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Yeah. So that needs to be clearly identified, that if any other Archimedes screw pump that we're looking at, it's got to have a fixed chamber to it, not a chamber that it's working against.
Correct.
Yeah. Because I think that gives, we've been sitting in 2 meetings up there arguing about Archimedes pumps. And as councillors, it's really confusing sitting in the room when you don't know the terminology of where council is coming from and why that decision was made of that sort of pump and not this sort of pump. So yeah, I'm just making it clear that as councillors, we need to understand that as well. Because otherwise we might as well not be in the room and waste 2 days in meetings for no reason. Yeah. So I'm not blaming you guys at all. I'm just making aware of the discussions that we're having in the community. Yeah. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, one of the ultimate outcomes is this is, we're understanding through R&D what our different options are as council. We're understanding what the legal framework looks like. So, what's in the must, should or could camp. Ultimately, it's using that information to come up with a strategy for council that we agree with council in terms of addressing this particular issue. I mean, that's the ultimate outcome of this particular project. So that should provide clarity about what this council needs to do in relation to this matter. And you can expect that, and that's one of the final stages of this particular project. So just getting underway now.